Good evening, everyone, whether you're joining us in person, which I'm delighted to see so many people here in person, and also if you're joining us online, welcome. My name is Joshua Teplitsky. I'm the director of the program in Jewish Studies here at the University of Pennsylvania, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Joseph Alexander Colloquium, which is the Jewish Studies program's oldest endowed lectureship. This is the 38th year of this endowed lectureship and has become a centerpiece of the program in Jewish Studies, outward-facing and communal events here for our academic community. The colloquium was established through the generosity of the Joseph Alexander Foundation and the Mackler family, and specifically by Helen and Alfred Mackler, in memory of their late brother and uncle. The Macklers are long-standing loyal friends of the university who have been amongst the staunchest supporters of our program, and I'm especially happy to acknowledge the presence of some family members, especially Randy Mackler-Windheim, who is joining us online today. I also want to acknowledge the co-sponsorship of the Department of History and the Center for Africa Studies here at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'll take just a moment to introduce our speaker. For me personally, it's quite the pleasure to introduce our speaker. We were reminiscing not too long ago that actually the very first time that Professor Teter and I met was here on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, or rather its satellite cousin, the Katz Center, where Professor Teter kindly began her mentorship of my career, and I'm delighted to be welcoming her back here after all of this time. Professor Teter is a professor of history and the Schvidler Chair of Judaic Studies at Fordham University, as well as the president of the American Academy of Jewish Research. She's the author of Jews and Heretics in Catholic Poland from 2005, another book, Sinners on Trial from 2011, Blood Libel, On the Trail of an Anti-Semitic Myth, and finally, the book that she'll be sharing with us information about today, Christian Supremacy, Reckoning with the Roots of Anti-Semitism and Racism. Professor Teter is prolific, writes quickly and importantly, never sacrificing quality even with quantity. She's the author of dozens of articles in English, Hebrew, Italian, and Polish. Her books have been widely recognized. Just to name some, her book Blood Libel from not long ago won the 2020 National Jewish Book Award, as well as the George L. Massey Prize from the American Historical Association and the Ronald Bainton Prize from the 16th Century Society. Professor Teter has received numerous fellowships, far too numerous for me to read now, because I think it's far more in our interests to hear the words of her historical scholarship. And so, Professor Teter, it's my honor to welcome you.
As Josh mentioned, this is a very special occasion for me to be here. Because we met as young scholars at the beginning of our careers, at different stages, but still at the beginning of our careers. It's probably almost decades ago, but maybe not that long. And we've learned from each other over these years and enjoyed friendship and learning together. And it's a really delight and pleasure to be here at Josh's invitation, and really I want to congratulate Penn for having him here because he's amazing and you're up for a lot of fun and interesting things going on. And I also wanted to acknowledge the Joseph Alexander Foundation because they were the first foundation that supported us at Fordham University when we started our Center for Jewish Studies, and they believed in us before anybody else could believe in us. I am sorry we can't meet in person, but it's an honor to be delivering this lecture. So thank you to the members of the family who are joining us online. So I'm going to share the screen with those of you who are online. This was an unexpected project for me to write. As I wrote in my introduction, I was thinking about these issues as perhaps a retirement project. But first of all, I want to say something that I come to the second part of the last part of the title, to the aspect of racism, out of Jewish studies and out of having grown up in Europe. So I was an outsider to the American concept of racism, of American history, and many many levels. But I have for years worked, read, taught, and written about anti-Jewish history of anti-Jewish sentiment, and including modern anti-Semitism. And perhaps coming from as an outsider and learning about anti-Black racism in the United States and American history allowed me to see certain things that perhaps insiders may not be able to see, and conversely, seeing what I could see reflected back and made things clearer for me as a scholar of Jewish history, but also as a scholar of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish hostility. And I wanted to share with you a little bit on that journey, and it was something that struck me when I was watching a film by Raoul Peck, I'm Not Your Negro, about James Baldwin. And in that film, if you haven't watched this film, it's a very powerful film. In that film, there is a clip of James Baldwin speaking in a PBS segment. In the PBS segment 1963, in which he is forcing the audience, predominantly white audience, to think about why white America has created the image, the concept, the words, derogatory words for Black people. And he started, why was it necessary to have the N man in the first place? I'm not an N, I'm a man. And if you think that I'm an N, it means you need him. And he, of course, pronounced it because of the power of that word. That was precisely the point why he did it. And I'm not the N here, and you invented him. And when he was speaking, that it struck me, and I was actually at the time teaching a class on the history of anti-Semitism, it struck me that this is exactly the creation of the caricature, the creation of the N person, not even a person, was exactly like the invention of the Jew in certainly me coming from Europe. And just to give you a sort of a sense what he meant by using the N-word to give the audience and ask them why they invented that. Here is an image from a very racist book from 1900, Negro Beast, or the Image of God, the Negro, not the Son of Man. And the book, it's a long book, but has a number of images that tries to set this contrast between white people and the Black people as imagined, as caricatured, as created. And here's another one, again, Virgin Mary. And I want you to pay attention to the white girl image, because it will come up in a moment in a different way. But again, the idea was the caricature of the Black person as completely different. And it struck me that it was very similar to the caricature, even in tropes, of the ugly, the deformed Jew, contrasted to the beautiful Christian European. And here is the image of that girl, because it has the imagery in Europe of the Christians compared to the caricature of the Jews. It's very similar aesthetically as that of the caricature of the imagery of the white person in the United States. And so that was one thing. And then as I was reading about American history, the same thing, sort of, is Black history part of American history? Same questions as is Jewish history part of European history, is Polish history, is Jewish history? So these things were striking to me, that there are so many parallels in that. And as I was reading, I kept writing on margins, compared to Jews, similar to Jews, similar to Jews. And let me just show you a couple of examples of the parallels that I started counting. So this is the whole sort of list, but I want to highlight a couple of the things. Jews and Judaism became constitutive contrast figures to Christianity and to Christian identity, in much the same way as Black people became contrast figures, very constitutive to white identity, especially in the United States, but in Europe since the expansion, colonial expansion. Both were seen as lazy, but for different reasons. In America, Black people were shown as lazy at the expense of the white men. But Jews in Europe were shown as lazy because they were unwilling to work physically and were only making money out of money and exploiting Christians. So again, the cost is to the other group, but the trope, though different, very similar. Both were seen if they tried to speak up or if they demanded respect and in modern times equality, they were seen as insolent, arrogant. In the case of Black people, the trope of an uppity Black person. The Negro question, the Jewish question, refusal to accept Jews as equal, refusal to accept Black people as equal, the carnality of Jews and the sexualization of Jews as carnal and dangerous to Christian women are very, very similar in the way that Black men, especially Black men, were portrayed. And again, I showed you the visual parallels as well in the. So I began to ask, why is that? Why are such striking similarity in the differences, but nonetheless similarities in concepts? And I began to, again, I'll give you a couple of examples. The lecherous Black man ogling the white women is dangerous, and the lecherous Jew from European caricatures. Again, very similar in this, and I that was sort of making me think about the parallels. And of course, the Black studies and Jewish studies have been broken up, and the connections between anti-Semitism and racism, especially in recent decades, have not been really explored, and if nothing else, avoided and have been rather explosive and dangerous terrain. But I'm not the first one to connect the two. There are, of course, scholars of Jewish Black relations who have explored all kinds of topics, but conceptually, anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism have also been explored by other intellectuals. So the value of comparison, I think, was captured here by W.E.B. Du Bois in his essay, an address, The Negro and the Warsaw Ghetto, after he visits Warsaw in 1948, and then this was published in 1949, and this was published in 1952. And he says that the result of these 3 visits in Europe, where he faced and experienced and saw anti-Semitism, particularly my view of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1949, was not so much clearer understanding of the Jewish problem in the world as it was real and more complete understanding of the Negro problem. And that's, for me, what happened when I started looking and studying and exploring and reading the primary sources and reading scholarship on anti-Black racism. It was not so much that I could bring something new, perhaps, to the understanding of anti-Black racism, but it was something that gave me clarity and made me rethink the history of anti-Semitism, or I wouldn't say the long history, but anti-Jewish animus is, I think, perhaps more accurate than anti-Semitism. Scholars around the World War, 1930s, 1940s, have been making these connections. In fact, the word racism was first used in connection to anti-Semitism, was invented in connection with anti-Semitism. Black intellectuals, in the crisis, were writing and drawing parallels between the Nazi policies and what was happening in the United States to Black Americans. Jewish intellectuals were also writing about it. There was a lot of, in those 2 decades, 1930s, 1940s, there was a lot of exchange and thinking about these parallels. In a beautiful poetic meditation, if you can say, on anti-Semitism and racism, this film make these parallels and try to make Americans think about the continuing prejudices against also Jews in America and racism and exclusion of Black Americans in the United States. I highly recommend this film. So I came to think about it. We need to get beyond this is the sort of minute what it made me realize and rethink the history of what some scholars broadly call anti-Semitism, the idea of this longest hatred. And what I began to reflect on these parallels between anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism, I came to the conclusion that it's about the trope of servitude and slavery, and really the idiom of power and the concept of power. It's not so much about hatred, history of emotions. I think we can sort of rethink that, but it is about the ways of thinking about social hierarchies and the ideas of power. And to that, I think we can look at the roots of it to think about what kind of texts and ideas create mental and cultural frameworks of thinking that create a hierarchy of values. And Paul, in his epistles, created a hierarchy of values that he assigned to Jews and to Christians. One was higher than the other. The flesh and the spirit was the contrast. The law and the spirit, the flesh and the promise, law and faith. One higher than the other, one better than the other. And he began to use, again, in a metaphorical, allegorical way, the idea associating Jews with slavery to the law, slavery to earth, to earthly Jerusalem, and so on and so forth, right? And Christianity as again associated with freedom and faith and spirit, and she is the Jerusalem of above, and she is free. So the carnality is very much here. The carnality that then later on continues in this way. The children of the flesh are Jews, and the children of promise are Christians. And crucially, although not in the context of power and hierarchy, he uses the phrase, the elder shall serve the younger. And here it's more about predestination, the will of God, of what's the purpose of election of God, than about hierarchy of power. But centuries later, when the political situation changes, when the actual Christianity is now a Christian empire with laws and military and state structures and that, the idea of power is much more visible, and those theological ideas later on are translated into law. At that time, Augustine, another important Christian thinker, theologian, writer, who returns to this idea of Jews' carnality and really reinforces that idea of Jewish carnality and Christian spirit, and creates that dichotomy of Christianity and Judaism, of Christianity is the younger brother, and he creates these biblical pairs in which Cain, Ishmael, Esau are representing Judaism, not historically or textually accurate, but nonetheless they have this assigned carnality and greed and on things like that. And then he, in this new historical context, returns to the verse, "The elder shall serve the younger," and he says there's nothing that can anybody think differently than the older people, the Jews, should serve the younger Christian people, and the primacy of the elder is transferred to the younger by compact, because the elder Esau passionately, again, carnality, craved lentils, which the younger prepared for his meal. What could be clearer than the reference in these two promises to the people of Israelites and to the whole world, the former according to the flesh, the latter according to faith. And again, and there's very clear hierarchy of values here. So that Christian theological supersessionism, that theological assignment of values, is then reified in law. And here is an example. There are others where it is reflected. No, on no account shall a Jew buy a Christian slave, neither shall he contaminate him with Jewish sacraments and convert him from Christian to Jew. There was no law that prohibited Christians from owning Christian slaves. This was a law that prohibited Jews from owning Christian slaves. They could own Jewish slaves, they could own pagan slaves, but not Christian slaves. This is the first time when we have a special law that singles out a group of people and begins to create a policy around who they are. And here it is also that hierarchy of power and discomfort with Jews having authority and power over Christians. In the book, I talk a little bit more about it and explain it more, but that trope of both servitude and theology and law is then deployed in in canon law, and also in some aspect of lay Christian law, although with much more nuance, because the pragmatism of monarchs and emperors was certainly at play, but the issue of authority over Christians, the issue of Christian servants, remained. And here you have a very explicit statement that is relentlessly reproduced and repeated throughout in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, that Jews who are by their own guilt consigned to perpetual servitude because they crucified the Lord. They ought not to be ungrateful to us, that requite Christian favor and continually with intimacy with contempt. We therefore, and then the Pope asks the rulers to restrain the excesses of the Jews, that they shall not dare raise their neck bowed under the yoke of perpetual slavery against the reverence of Christian faith, lest the children of a free woman should be slaves to the children of a slave, and rather than as slaves rejected by God, recognize themselves as slaves to whom Christ's death set free, at the same time that it enslaved them. And the idea of Jews growing insolent is there, again, the sort of out of their place, out of their hierarchy. Again, in the book, there's more about it, but here's an example from the 16th century and the bull establishing the what will be called the Roman ghetto. Again, that same notion of Jews having consigned to this perpetual servitude, that they exchange the servitude they owe to Christian for dominion over them. The trope of Jewish power comes out directly of the trope of an expectation of Jewish servitude. Again, insolence, they have erupted insolence, they just sort of lived along Christians, they lived and had lived normal life, but that was seen as insolent, out of order. And then again, as long as they persist in their errors, they should recognize through experience that they've been made slaves, while Christians have been made free through Jesus Christ, God and our Lord, and it is iniquitous that the children of the free woman should serve the children of a maid servant. And this idea of hierarchy. Lest you think this is all just pre-modern stuff. Here are the echoes of that in post-war Poland. Just a year before the infamous and tragic pogrom of Kielce took place, Jewish leaders met with the local bishop to discuss their concern with anti-Semitism. And in the report of the meeting, the bishop reportedly said, you know, Jews are talented merchants, talented doctors, talented lawyers. Poland is destroyed and it needs strength. Why don't Jews do what they are capable of? Why do they engage in politics? Can you imagine what it looks like when a priest comes to the ministry and a Jewish woman is sitting there, God knows from where, and treats our clergy with superiority and insolence? What kind of impression does it make, right? He is concerned with Jews in the position of power. And he is echoing that language, the centuries-old language that he may not be even aware of that it has that root, but it is that centuries-old language about insolence, about servitude, about the expectation where Jews should be in the social hierarchy. So what we see here in the social order is that Christian supersessionism, which is called sometimes replacement theology, gave the sense of Christian sense of superiority, theological superiority. Once it came to position of power, once Christianity became an empire, it became Christian supremacy. And I use the word supremacy in a very technical way throughout the book. I'm not using it in the context of skinheads running around and shouting things. I'm using it in the context of authority and power, political power, in this way. So what we see is we see the emergence of Christian supremacy, where they have affirmation of again, Christian power and Christian political power, and they implement that theological idea of superiority into law, and then reify essentially this idea of Jewish servitude and inferiority. That then affirms the Christian sense of domination, and then eventually it gives rise to the trope of Jewish power, of the unearned, undeserved social position. And it is displayed also in the visual language, which will allow me to transition here. So ecclesia and synagoga, the two pairs that are so well known from medieval and early modern Christian iconography. Ecclesia is obviously holding the church, and Christianity is a crowned queen holding the apotropos of power, and synagoga is the maiden, and blindfolded, broken staff, broken tablets, in a humbled position, right? Her position is humbled. Her eyes are pointing down. And that image is ubiquitous in manuscripts, in sculptures, in paintings throughout the pre-modern period all the way into the 18th century, although much less. By the 16th century, that imagery peters out and is quite rare. And here's a 16th century example where you see the ecclesia sitting crowned with a globe and a cross, and then synagoga is the blind woman on the donkey. So what about racism? In the early modern period, just as the Europeans are building and expanding into their colonies, they developed the iconography, the image of ecclesia, the church, Christianity, is transformed into Europa. Queen Europa. And you can see she has the crown, she still has the globe with the cross. She is a distinctly Christian queen. She sits on top, again, the globe, all the visual imagery that was very similar and developed in the context of the ecclesia is now deployed in the context of the synagogue, of Europa. But she's no longer dominating the synagogue, the humble maiden. She is now dominating the other continents. The three other continents, which are shown in different ways of civilization and relation, but nonetheless humbled, looking down below the Europa, the dominating Christian queen. So Asia and Africa and America. And that image is that trope is developed, and it's in both description and examples in the book called Iconologia. Cesare Ripa writes, has a description of what each represents, right? And Europa here, like the ecclesia, is seated Christian and filled with knowledge and abundance of things and foods and everything, and then the other women are clad in a much more humble way. By the 18th century, so if you in the 17th century can see Africa, you can't see it here if you are, but this is Africa because let me see if I can put it down. Africa, she is not yet racialized in any way, because for Europeans, Africa at that point means not North Africa, means Moorish Africa. But by the 18th century, the height of the slave trade, Africa became racialized as black. And I probably should have shown you like some of the ceramic from Meissen and others that she's definitely now black. Europa remains the white Christian queen. And it is then also translated into law, that thing that is mimicking the laws that were initially written about Jews. So here is an act concerning servants and slaves in Virginia. No Negroes, mulattoes, or Indians, although Christians, or Jews, Moors, Mohammedans, and other infidels, shall purchase any Christian servant, nor any other except for of their own complexion. And if any Negro, mulatto, and Indian, Jew, Moor, or Mohammedan, or other infidels, shall notwithstanding purchase any Christian white servant, the said servant shall ipso facto become free. Right? So it is both race and religion that are determining freedom and power here, a structure of power. So what I call is the rise of white, but nonetheless Christian supremacy with the colonial expansion. And then in the early Enlightened period, the liberté is portrayed as a white woman. Again, that same iconographic heritage that we've seen earlier. And what is interesting that after American colonies become independent, America becomes also a white in iconographically from that idea of America now, Columbia becomes the symbol of America, and she is now impersonated as the white woman. Here's another example of that. These are from 19th century, but so what we can see in this, the Christian aspect of the supremacy did not get lost in the process. So that's why I was always frustrated when I heard about this white supremacy in the United States. Like, no, it's white Christian supremacy. You're missing a big part of it. it's a very important aspect of it. But the direction is different, right? Here we have first enslavement, then we have the development of the idea and ideology of race to justify enslavement that comes, especially in the Enlightenment era. And then we have the development of ideology of racism and white supremacy. Whereas with Judaism and with the relationship with Jews, it was first a theological, theoretical idea, and then it became a supremacy rather than a legal reality of enslavement that becomes that leads to the ideology. So in some way, in relationship to Judaism and Jews, the ideology came before the actual legal supremacy. Whereas with race, there was a legal supremacy before the ideology was developed to justify that legal supremacy. But nonetheless, these were the two components that over time lead to what I would insist on calling white Christian supremacy. In the modern period, the idea and ideal of equality came clashing with the established for centuries, not millennia, ideas of social hierarchies. So modern, as the various states are reconsidering themselves out of monarchies with social structures that were in the pre-modern period and invent the new idea of a nation and the new idea of we. It comes, they begin question who is the we the people, who belongs to the we the people, who belongs to the nation. And in the modern period, we see that both Jews and Black people are excluded from the we. The perception of inferiority precludes any possibility of equality, and that equality is then seen as unearned and usurped power. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. Like in the book, there's more, but just to sort of flash examples, we see the questions whether Jews are Europeans, and we see this process of the Europeanization of Jews in the Enlightenment era, whether they coming from Asia and different by their religion, by their law, could be citizens, right? And here you have actually examples from both those who supported Christian Wilhelm von Dom, supported the idea that Jews should be included, and the bottom two did not. Does the law of Moses make citizenship full integration impossible? I think it does. They will never become fully integrated in the way Catholics, Lutherans, Germans, Swedes, and French live together, right? It's sort of implied shared Christian heritage here, whereas here we see this is impossible. And then wisdom, the imperative law does not to grant the Jews, whom it must always consider as foreigners among us, equality and the rights of French citizens and active citizens. The debate in the Netherlands, again, the question is, do we regard Jews as part of the we? Can we consider them Dutchmen or are they aliens? And again, collectively speaking, Jews cannot share in our Dutch social rights as citizens as long as they are Jews, right? The we is now defined in new ways that the pre-modern system did not force those questions as much in this process. And you know, one of the deputies said the outcome of this debate will teach all of Europe whether we in the Netherlands honor the rights of men or only a Christian man, the rights of citizens or only the rights of Christians. Right, this is the polity they're creating that is here. And then there was the thinking about the colonies and Black people in the colonies at the time. Here is one of the, and this is interestingly not translated in the Jew in the Modern World, that passage, because in Jewish historiography, this issue of slavery is not of interest in this way. But this was very much part of the debate. And here's one of the people who is at least ambivalent, if not hostile to the idea of Jewish citizenship. I'm of the opinion that we would not be obliged to incorporate all these thousands of Jews at once into the relations of our hitherto completely distinct society, just as we are not required to accept every other alien immediately to all civil rights. Their long residence in our regions may argue for speedy indulgence, but the prudent care for general well-being would be in their regard, demand that their transition from the state of alienation and deep humiliation, and perhaps there's a better translation, but I was with my German and Google Translate and the Dutch, I sort of made it up into whatever it is. So there might be a better translation. But the sacred rights of men, untimely granted to the slaves in San Domingo, served to the destruction of that French population. The freedom without enlightenment is altogether like a sharpened steel in the hands of children. And that. So again, this was very much on the mind, but the word emancipation was never used. So I caution us not to use that word for this period. And the idea whether, for whom these rights were invented kept coming up in this in the debates, because even though Jews reluctantly in some places in France and others were granted citizenship, the pushback was immediate. Here is Bruno Bauer saying that the idea of human rights was discovered for the Christian world in the last century. It was not for everybody. Jews should not be included. And of course, we have the Orientalization of Jews, thinking of them as a Semitic race with homeland in Palestine. And only later in the 19th century, we have the word Jewish emancipation used. But again, the question, the Jewish emancipation, however, really did no more than recognize the already existing alien domination. Then he press political, he repeats if you elected the alien, you make them legislator and judges. It's about political power. It's not necessarily about the sort of emotion and hatred, it's about political power. That they are objecting to. The Jews don't belong to our we. They should not have any business in our affairs. And again, the moment of emancipation, that is granting citizenship rights, was gained. The Jews insisted boldly on their certificate, demanded parity, right? Equality is this insolence. Demanding equality is this insolence. And then again, the removal of Christian pictures. They demanded all these schools, but they will always be Jews. We're nothing else but Germans Orientals, right? You see this racialization of Jews in this period. But that racialization of Jews goes deeper, and it comes actually of the Enlightenment and pre-Enlightenment era studies of religion, which, to my surprise, scholars have missed on this idea. So the early works that suddenly began to look at the different ceremonies and religions of the world began to discuss Jewish religious ceremonies in the context of what they were reading in the Bible. So they placed Jews in Palestine or in the Holy Land, as it may have been referred to, and as the sort of at the beginning of the evolution of these various religions, and then later on they began to draw parallels between some of the animistic and other religious practices in beyond Europe. So Jews become orientalized and placed in Palestine. The 19th century anti-Semitic thinkers are not suddenly thinking of Jews as going to Palestine out of nowhere. This is that long epistemology of thinking of Jews and their religion as going back to this land. Some even compared Jews and Jewish practices to those of East Indians. And here I am showing a slide comparing the enchantment of serpents with what Moses was doing and with the serpent in the Bible. You see, oh, they are the same, very similar. And again, that the Europeanization of Jews that leads later on to that racialization that we see in the modern when modern anti-Semitism emerges in a racialized form. And of course, here you have this Jews being kicked out to Palestine, and again, and as not belonging to Europe, as not being part of the European culture. So we see the Europeanization of Jews. Jews are from Asian, Oriental, German-speaking Orientals. See the rise of ethnic nationalism. Jews no longer fit in Palestine, in Europe. They are more suited for Palestine. We no longer have a conversation about Jews and Christians. We have now a conversation of Jews and Germans, and Jews are aliens who should not have any business in our affairs and not be our judges. In the United States, the debate, citizenship is not defined in the Constitution or anywhere else, and it took a while for the idea of citizenship to be defined, who belonged. But just as you have the question whether citizenship was for Christians in Europe, in the United States, you had the question whether it was who belonged to the we the people. And in that very important debate of admission of Missouri to the Union and the question of free Black people, whether they could settle and live in Missouri, some of the representatives in the Congress articulated the idea that this was we, the white people. Indians, free Negroes, mulattoes, slaves, tell me not that the Constitution, when it speaks of we the people, means these. The argument in favor, including in the class of citizens, free people of color, goes too far. It was we, the white people. And there are other voices and examples in the debate showing, well, no, they have equal rights in Vermont and other places and things like that. But the idea is, the debates are whether or not free. Again, we're not talking about slavery. I think for too often people have focused on the enslaved Americans, but I think a far better comparison between the situation, legal and even cultural, the place with Jews in Europe is that of free Black Americans, not the enslaved Black Americans. Can a Negro whose ancestors were important, this is in the Dred Scott era, into this country and sold as slaves, become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States, and as such become entitled to all the rights and privileges and immunities guaranteed by that instrument to the citizen? It's about political rights. It's not necessarily just about residency, it's about political rights. Just as some of the Dutch deputies were willing to grant Jews residence rights, just not political rights. So again, the equality and idea of equality before law and citizenship challenges these ideas, these deeply entrenched ideas of social hierarchy and social values. Just to wrap up, contemporary echoes of exclusion, inferiority, and power. This is from an NRCC ad in 2018 for the election, and there's a video online you can find. The connoisseur of George Soros, the trope of George Soros, obviously, and the two outsiders that are creating chaos, sowing chaos in America, Black people and the Jewish man who is out of his Google it, George Soros funds D.A. Bragg again. this is discomfort that you have a Black district attorney indicting a white man, former president, here, and the allegation that that he is supported by Jews. So again, there are parallels, there are differences. This goes back in the civil rights era. Again, race mixing is financed by Jews, but again, these two outsiders that are seen as disrupting that social order and demanding not the right place. So I think I'll stop here. There's more to talk about. There's much material that I couldn't cover, but I think I'd love to open it up for discussion and see what you have to say. Questions and comments. Thank you. People online can see. Yeah, it's just.
Okay, thank you, Professor Teter. We've got time for questions.
Before happening, Professor. Thank you. I really appreciate the talk, and I was very taken by the discussion of tropes, and especially at the beginning with that list of the parallel list of Jews and Blacks. I do want to ask, and this is especially from the American perspective. At the end of your talk, you started to reference Jews as, being identified as Oriental and Asiatic. But to what extent, if I were to push on this, would other groups that are othered, Chinese Exclusion Act, looking at Orientals before the rise of Palestine as Oriental, certainly both earlier and later, some Hispanic, all depends where they're coming from. So to what extent are these, because I was thinking of examples in which these tropes would hold among many other groups. So I wanted to ask about the binary of, of Jews in this.
Right, so the idea of Jews as Orientals that emerges in Europe, right? They are placed out of Europe.
And here too it comes.
Right, and you are right in the Chinese Exclusion Act. And in fact, one of the helpful idea is the idea articulated by Ian Haney Lopez, the white by law, right, in the United States. And Jews were white by law because they could immigrate, because they were considered as Europeans, right? And they could be naturalized in that way. The Chinese and other people from Asia were not, and there are some interesting cases where they say, I'm a Christian, all my children are Christian, I lived here for 30 years, my skin is whiter than some of the people who are coming from Europe, I am white, I should be naturalized. And the Supreme Court says no. Because they are from Asia, right? So they are it's racialized in that way. So and they are so you have, and in the United States, what is interesting is that Jews demand that parity, and they just take it for granted. Of course, we are citizens and we shouldn't be discriminated, because they use the religious clause of the Constitution, right? So they look at what happens in Europe is interesting. In the debates over citizenship, the Europeans know we cannot discriminate around religion, right? It's Enlightenment era where religion, you can't do it. So they twist the idea of Judaism, draw on the idea of Jews as obedient to law, say that Jews abide by the law of Moses and turn them into a political nation that cannot be politically loyal to the nation states, right? So they politicize Jewish religious practices as a law, as a nation, in that political way, in order to exclude them from citizenship. And I think what works in both places is that that essentially in that creation of the new identities, the new national identities, the new we's, it's a process. My colleague with whom I teach a class on anti-Semitism and races, I teach a class, we were just talking with students last week. It's a process of not inclusion, but it's a process of exclusion. Who do we exclude so we can keep the power, right? Because it's ultimately about the power. It's not about residency. It's not about that. Although with, as you well know, with free Black Americans, it was like, well, we can't live with them here. They are free, right? That is this here, but it is about whether they belong to the polity in that way. And that's, again, whether emotion, hatred later on comes, I think, if anything, it's contempt and anger, if we're talking about any emotions here, rather than the idea of hatred, because it is about power. I'm not sure whether, but yeah, you know, the Chinese, there is this different kind of thing.
My name's Hila. I'm a graduate student here, and I'm also really thankful for the level of detail with which you address visual tropes and narrative tropes, and also the questions of citizenship that kind of parallel on a legal level. I want to pick up on what you're mentioning with regards to the access that white Jewish people have had to whiteness. I'm thinking especially since you started with this quote from James Baldwin, an essay that James Baldwin wrote on the matter, right? With words that he chose very carefully. Negroes are anti-Semitic because they're anti-white. And when I am involved in, whether it's journalism or organizing, one of the primary obstacles that I encounter to a unified front against white supremacy, or Christian white supremacy, as you put it, is a deep resistance in my own white Jewish communities to recognition of our access to whiteness and our exploitation of it. And that's true in the US, but it's also certainly a global phenomenon. So another thing that I appreciated about the talk was the way that it is so clearly aimed at using the depth of your knowledge to make an impact in this contemporary world. And I wonder what tools this research offers to get at this particular block where white supremacy is actually the operative material structure, economic structure in the world today, and it's one that Jewish people have access to and have been using to participate in anti-Black racism in certain contexts.
Right. So, I mean, one thing that I have a comment on the Baldwin piece. That one thing that we have to be aware is that he writes about Jews. It's as if he was also questioning their whiteness.
Oh, sure.
Right? That is the, and I think that is the legacy of the Christian supremacy that doesn't let Jews quite be fully integrated. There are these outsiders, and he mentions here and there some Irish, but he really focuses on Jews, and it's like, well, there are in Harlem. He writes about Harlem. There are Irish, there are Finnish real estate owners and landlords and stuff like that. He focuses on Jews, and I think that we have to probe that legacy. And he comes from a deeply Christian context, right? His stepfather was a preacher, and but that sort of exclusion and not quite feeling comfortable with it. Well, why don't we just write about all the white people, right? Why do single Jews out in that way? But to your other question, what tools do we have? Jews absolutely were demanding the full citizenship that they thought that they deserved. And you can see it very nicely. I talk about it in the book, in the way they take the tools of their citizenship, which were denied to Black Americans, when there are incidents of anti-Semitism, right? They organize, they influence vote, they pressure politicians, and there are really no big systematic, I mean, there are here and there in some states, especially in the earlier period, laws obviously excluding Jews from certain states, but and you have the private covenants and the civil rights the discrimination, but you don't have laws in the United States that exclude Jews from voting, for instance, right? The way the Jim Crow laws are specifically designed to undo the Reconstruction era amendments. So one way I would think about it is I would refer to that that idea of the white by law that Henny Lopez talks about, that I found very useful in the sense that Jews are admitted to full citizenship, even though on the social level there might be discrimination through covenants, there might be discrimination, or constantly they might be reminded, but this is a Christian nation. What are you talking about? You have not, you know, but they say, well, we have the right to do that. So I think what you may want to draw attention to as a tool is to acknowledge that those very specific different legal contexts in the United States, from the moment of just immigration to the moment of being able to turn to the political tools of citizenship, such as voting, right? Whereas Black Americans, even if they were property owners, even if they were even affluent, that didn't matter because there were laws that were especially racially designated in that way. There was something else I wanted to say, and
May I-
Actually, we have a number of people who also want to ask questions, so I think we'll collect a few more.
after, yeah.
Let's stop Ben and Molly, and then we need to connect back.
Small question and a somewhat longer question. You mentioned this phrase, the elder shall serve the younger. And in traditional society, that's one of the most disruptive ideas. You're in early modern training. I'm wondering if you could just speak to some of the friction that either did or should have met such an idea of disrupting the authority of the elder, even if it's for the specific purpose of explaining why Jews could be subordinate to Christians. It just seems to go against the grain of so much what traditional society is about. The larger question, it's going to be a little bit provocative. Is it not in the nature of monotheistic religions to establish their supremacy wherever they can?
Okay, so two things. One thing is that the passage, the elder shall serve the younger, is obviously going back to Genesis. This is from the book of Genesis, and it's the story of the twins, Jacob and Esau, being born as twins. Who is who, right? Who is all, and that idea, and of course it does go against certain patriarchal orders, and that's why we have kinds of tricks and that are told in the story of Genesis between the younger and the older brother, right? In terms of the second passage, yes, monotheistic religions have the idea of asserting truth, but they don't have to necessarily do it as for Christianity, it is a tool of denial of the validity of Judaism, let's call it that way, whatever that was at the time, and the validity of it. So it's built on a negation. It's not just built, oh, we are true and you should convert to us and we'll be all saved, but it's about what you are doing was being rejected by God. what you do is old and no longer valid, and that's where the power thing comes from. And because it has the claims of drawing on the Jewish scriptures, while Jews are denying that, there is always this sense of insecurity, which is why you have the laws that are trying to put Jews in a certain position, trying to regulate Jewish-Christian relations, so there wouldn't be that kind of cross-pollination. There's a, anyway, I could go on about that, so I'm not sure whether that answers.
Thank you so much. You had some great quotes up there. I think my favorite was Bruno Bauer's, who said, "We invented human rights. You can't have them," which was just an extraordinary piece of logic. My question, I guess maybe to say to Ben, it's not, I don't think it's entirely a nature of monotheistic religions. It's the nature of humans to dominate other humans. The question is, what is the apparatus of justification? And that's used, like comparing those apparatuses. At the beginning, I sort of thought it was interesting following your thinking, like, let's look at servitude, like theological servitude as, but at some point I feel like it flipped and Christianity wasn't a driver anymore, it became a secondary pretext. And I wonder if Christianity is the language that you want to use after the modern flip. In other words, it becomes a justification for something, no longer a new structure. So
No, it's a great, yeah, no, it's a great question, and but the interesting thing is that the Christian undertones never get lost in the modern period. That's what was, I mean, we are such products of the Enlightenment, and it's like, secularization, and this no longer matters, and we are a secular state. And there is this, whether it's an unspoken but taken for granted assumption about Christianity, Jews will not serve in the army, or they will, whatever, in that kind of assumption that will be, they will not eat with us. Or when they eat with us, I can't trust them because now they eat pork. How can I trust them? There's all that kind of question of exclusion. But that idea never gets lost, even in the sort of secular state. And that affirmation of, well, we are after all a Christian.
No, I think the Christian discourse persists.
Yeah.
I just think its function feels to me quite different.
Right, but then if there would be no reason to reject Jews, right? They're white, as we in this right. But why not? Why not have these useful people who can contribute so much? Why this discomfort? And that's the legacy of that Christian thinking about Jews that has again persisted. Whether or not it's conscious, right? Whether or not we'd feel comfortable with a Jewish president in the United States. Maybe not, maybe yes, right? In that kind of way. So there is a certain underlying discomfort, like this guy this bishop said, like, the Jewish woman in the ministry and the priest comes in, like, come on, right? The supposedly secular communist state, but that kind of assumption. So I think that's never lost, and that's something that is often lost in the discourse of white supremacy, and the forgetting that aspect that it is a Christian
aspect. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, sort of on the same topic of the fragility of Jewish whiteness in the modern period, whether you could speak a little bit about Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement, because that seems like a critical piece of engagement where Jews, there is some sort of underlying connection that causes Jews who are now asked to the war, and many moved to the suburbs. There has been a massive sort of shift in their social, in especially Ashkenazi social standing, and yet there's disproportionate Jewish involvement in the civil rights movement and the March of Selma and so forth. And so do you see sort of these tropes at all playing a role in either real or imagined alliance between Jewish and African American communities based on certain similar methods of discrimination?
Right, and I just asked, like, which Jews, right? There are some that are committed to that, who are writing, and then some that feel the idea of Black power demanding of parity, the integration of schools, makes them uncomfortable, right? So that's the thing. I think we always have to think about not the Jews or the Jews, even better, right? But which Jews? Who? And even that assumption of Jewish whiteness, not all Jews were white, right? But it erases that idea because there's this assumption of Jewish whiteness. So I think we always have to kind of let's step back and let's think about it. And who do you mean? And there are those who will, Gil Ribak has a very interesting research on Eastern European Jews coming to America and projecting how they are seeing Black Americans. And the other thing about this sort of idea of whiteness, going back to Baldwin, he said, well, they're Italian and they're French and they're German and they're Poles and they come and they become white. But they become white because that's the law. We check the census. We have to choose white or something like that, right? The structures of the country assign certain categories to that. And they also, and from that, there are also laws and policies and going back to structures, how much money gets to that district according to demography and things like that. So I think we have to think about those things. And in terms of the engagement in civil rights, I think those who are seeing that, it's like, yeah, we don't want that. We see Leo Horowitz, right, who makes the film. He is a Jewish filmmaker in the 40s. He's essentially engaging with the discourse that Black intellectuals were engaging in the crisis and others in the 30s, talking about these parallels, right? So they draw, they have attention, and then there are some of that is the breakdown, and of that sort of discomfort and integration and change and that takes place. And some will remain in the camp, and some will not, and will turn around, become conservative and change that. Nancy Sinkov's book on Lucy Davidovich sort of talks about that kind of shift, that shifts to the shift to the right of some of those Jews who were engaged earlier in these.
Thank you for a really compelling presentation. I'm particularly taken by your argument that this isn't just an emotional question, that it's really about power. But I worry that if we sort of take emotion out of the picture entirely, as you did in at least this brief sentence we gave us today, that we might be missing something there as well. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we can bring emotion back in and think about how it's interconnected with power in these ways.
Yeah, but again, I would maybe jettison the idea of hatred. But I would concede that contempt and then anger are part of the story. But hatred just doesn't work, and it is much more difficult to historicize. Whereas when you think about contempt and anger, you have to ask about why, and then sort of and contempt is inherently about power, right? You may not hate someone, but you may feel contempt for someone. And I think there's much more in this sort of contempt and then anger when that balance of power is disrupted. Then there is the I'm here with Professor Engel, who is cautioning us not to use the word anti-Semitism in this way, and this idea of this longer, the emotional, the longer psychologizing it. Then, yeah, of course, emotions have a history. I concede, but it's much more difficult to historicize psychology and emotions than it is to historicize these dynamics of power, and even if you throw in some emotions into it, but again, carefully which ones.
Professor Engel actually has a question.
I have quite a few, but I will confine myself. Natalie left, but I want to continue on a point that she started to raise. and it has to do with one of the slides that you showed in the middle, a schematic that presented two opposite arrows of causality, right? You claim that the institution of slavery and its attendant legal supports are what generated a set of ideas that you call racism, whereas for Jews, the ideas functioned as motivators before the fact and creators of legal structures and institutions, rather than as being justifications after. Now, Natalie was trying to hint that she disagrees. I think I'm with her on this, but I'm not going to argue the point here. My question is, let's assume for the moment that you're correct. How then do these two opposite trajectories lead to the congruence of motifs and imagery that you demonstrated in your opening slide? Second question, just very, very quickly, about the Orientalization of Jews. Jews have their own narrative of their history that they have brought everywhere they've been, or nearly everywhere they've been. And it always Orientalizes them. That's the story that they tell to others. And that leads me to the larger question of what role do Jews play in the shaping of attitudes toward them?
Okay, so the first question about the outcome is the same, right? The idea, but the order is different. So Christianity, when it begins to form its own identity, early Christians are forming their identity against Jews and Judaism and Jewish practices as a negation of them, but in a position of weakness. They are the persecuted ones, right? Once Christianity comes to power, then the tools of the state, the legal framework, begins to apply that theology of the eldership, so the younger Jews should not have authority over them. And that you begin to have a reification of actually social hierarchies, right? Didn't always work. Literary Jews were, not, but the idea that you have a law, that you expect that a certain group will be in a certain position, and then you don't have them, that begins to. So that's what you have in one side. With the enslavement, again, it's a gradual process, right? That there was enslavement. First, we had the indentured servants that didn't work. Then you have Black Africans being imported. But then you have the legalization, and you have the gradual introduction of the idea of whiteness into law, which didn't exist at the beginning, and then the idea of justification and the creation. And I'm not inventing this idea of race and racism as a justification. These are scholars who have worked on that in the Enlightenment era, where you have this notion of all men are created equal. Everybody has human rights that emerge in the Enlightenment era. All these philosophers from the Enlightenment who are speaking about these big ideas, but they live in empires that are engaging in that process, in the process of enslavement, and they are trying to justify. So they take to science. And they say, well, maybe there's something scientific. They invent that they are of different race. So they invent the idea of race. So race, and then they say, well, because they are of different race, that's why they are more, suited for the labor, and they have no brains, and they have wool instead of hair. And there's even a phrase of Christian hair to define the white peoples versus wool. So there is the thing. So what you see, but in the process, you have the ideas of superiority of one class of people who are entitled to power over the other class of people, whether it's Jews, again, whether it works or doesn't, and often doesn't work. That's why I talk about the idiom of power for Jews and the actual power and enslavement for African Americans. There are differences. Despite these legal differences, it doesn't change the way Europeans, Christian Europeans, and then Euro-Americans and Europeans think about whether Jews or Black people in the sense of their superiority and their and looking down at both groups. So that's what then brings us to those parallels in this way. Again, parallels with differences, right? In that way, there are distinct differences. Soros is funding the chaos. It's not Colin Kaepernick who's funding the chaos, right? There is a power dynamic in this, but it emerges from these paths of conceptualizing these different groups and where they belong in society. So that's how I see this process of the thing. And again, you can read Barbara Fields and other scholars and Andrew Curran, who was a scholar of alignment, to talk about this, who discuss this process and the direction of the idea of race and ideology of race and racism. But they emerge from very different parts. One emerges from the position of power and European domination of the colonies, and the other emerges from the theology and trying to identify, create an identity in an era of persecution. So there are very different starting points, but with power of the empires and states, they come to the same.
Many more questions. Maybe one more. Thank you so much. I'm reading your book slowly, and I'm loving it. The breadth of it is amazing. Thank you. I want to circle back to Ben's question. I'm grateful that he's not here, so I can ask it in my own terms. To what extent is the focus on Christian ideas too narrow, and to what extent is this really a story about religions, empires, and power? Garth Foden has this interesting book about the first millennium, where he argues that once we wed monotheism and empires, we begin to see power used to homogenize and to marginalize in a way that we don't see in, he argues, in preceding empires. To take your examples of Christian Rome forbidding Jews from owning slaves, Zoroastrian law from the Sasanian Empire similarly forbids others from owning Zoroastrian slaves, Muslim law forbids Jews from owning slaves. So anytime and I taught last week the Hasmonean expansion, where the Hasmoneans begin to extend their territory and they start forcibly circumcising the people they conquer. So to what extent is this about power, not about a particular set of ideas?
No, this is a fantastic question. So I'm obviously writing this book from the position of New York sitting in America, right? So I'm trying to explain our reality. Right? Where I'm writing it, I don't know, you pick. Somewhere in Iraq or in Syria or wherever, or Morocco or Libya or something. I might be talking about Islamic supremacy. I'm talking about that. It's absolutely about power. And I think that's why it's useful in changing the discourse of why were Jews hated all the time. Or why is that? Because it's about power. And that's what you can contextualize, and that makes it I think helps explain the history of anti-Semitism in whatever way it is, but it also helps it nuance that it's not unique, although there is this particular story of Jews in the West for these particular historical reasons. But in fact, it is about power, and then look at other groups and how they are dealing with subgroups that they seem that they are inferior. And again, absorption of difference does not necessarily have to be about power domination. The question is there a sense of domination and a sense of superiority towards that other group? So I think you have two aspects. One is the political power, and another one is a sense of superiority and a sense of inferiority of the other group. I think that, and then we can talk about other countries. We can pick other countries and think about it. What did that work? And that's why I think the word supremacy is useful in that sense. because it is political and has a sense of superiority and it has a sense of power. And again, and not in that, you know, loose way it's used often in the current discourse.
Yeah, it's clear from the ongoing rush of questions that this is a provocative book that is going to inspire many more conversations and challenges
And more
to
books,
come.
hopefully.
Hopefully more books and responses and reviews. But in the interests of time, we'll put this conversation at least to a pause for now. It's overreach just to thank Professor Teter for her time, her ideas,